I moved into Lakeview Heights looking for peace. I'd done my time living downtown, too many years surrounded by chaos, sirens, and crime. After 2 decades on the force, all I wanted was a quiet, peaceful corner of suburbia. A yard big enough for my pit bull, Axel, and a porch where I could sit back, drink coffee, and forget the ugliness I'd seen every day as a detective. For a while, it worked. The neighborhood was quiet, almost picture-perfect. Kids rode their bikes in the street. Elderly couples walked their dogs at dusk. Nobody bothered me, and I kept mostly to myself. But peace, as it turns out, is always fragile. Before we dive into this intense story, we have a small favor to ask. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far our stories reach. Thank you so much. Now let's dive in. The trouble began innocently enough. Letters about minor infractions. Grass a quarter-inch too high, a mailbox painted the wrong shade of blue, warnings that my truck tires were parked 2 inches too far onto the grass. Petty nonsense, I shrugged off. But the warnings piled up, signed every time by a woman named Karen, president of the HOA, a self-appointed ruler with the personality of a parking ticket. I ignored her, figuring she'd find someone else to bother. That was my first mistake. It was a Saturday afternoon when things escalated. I had just returned from the mall, picking up my Halloween costume, an insanely realistic zombie outfit complete with fake blood, latex wounds, and shredded clothing that looked straight out of a horror film. I parked my truck, tossed the bags in the trunk, and paused to scroll on my phone. Nothing suspicious, nothing that should have drawn attention. Yet, as I glanced up, there she was, Karen, standing in the middle of the sidewalk, arms crossed, eyes narrowed into slits, her head tilted slightly, a predator sizing up prey. Her gaze locked onto me, intense and calculating, like she was mentally scripting my downfall. A shiver crept down my spine, my instincts kicking in. She wasn't just watching, she was plotting. And the next day she made her move. It happened so quickly I barely had time to register it. The banging at my door sounded like a battering ram. 3 loud thumps, slow and deliberate, each one louder and angrier than the last. Axel shot up, his powerful muscles tense, ears perked. His dark eyes flicked toward the door, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Easy, boy," I murmured, setting my coffee down. But even as I said it, the hair on the back of my neck rose. Something wasn't right. I cracked the door open. Standing outside were 3 men dressed in khakis and matching tactical vests, emblazoned with a badge that read HOA Enforcement. The lead guy, stocky with a buzz cut and eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, stepped forward. "You're in violation of multiple HOA rules," he announced, waving a cheap-looking clipboard as if it were a warrant. "You're ordered to vacate immediately." My eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" Karen suddenly appeared from behind them, arms crossed, eyes glittering with satisfaction. "We've given you enough chances," she said sweetly. "You refuse to cooperate." "Cooperate?" I laughed bitterly. "With what exactly? Your imaginary rules?" The leader held up his clipboard like a trophy. "We have authorization to enforce compliance." I stared at their uniforms again. Cheap fabric, patches sewn crookedly, badges obviously fake. My gut twisted into a familiar knot. This wasn't just an overzealous HOA stunt. These were criminals. "Listen, buddy," I said coldly. "I'm not sure what circus Karen hired you from, but you need to leave now." He smirked. "You're making a mistake." "No," I growled. "You are." I shut the door firmly, locked it, and seconds later, the door crashed inward, splintering under a heavy kick. They had forced their way into my home, but they'd just made their biggest mistake, because Axel had been waiting for this moment all his life. Axel exploded forward before I even gave the command. 90 kilos of raw muscle and protective fury surged through the doorway, teeth bared, a snarl erupting from his chest that shook even me. The first man, the cocky one, hit the floor like he'd been struck by lightning, his bravado evaporating as Axel pinned him, jaws mere inches from his terrified face. The second one froze, trembling, his eyes wide with panic. The third guy tried to run, stumbled backwards, tripping over the curb and sprawling onto the driveway. Karen shrieked in shock, staggering back, her smirk wiped clean off her face. I stepped out onto my porch, arms folded, watching the chaos unfold. "Like I said," I spoke calmly. "Big mistake." The guy on the ground whimpered, eyes wide, begging without words for mercy. Axel didn't move. He just held him, perfectly disciplined, awaiting my command. Karen, red-faced and trembling, shrieked, "Get that monster away!" I tilted my head, smirking slightly. "That monster is better behaved than your little rent-a-cops. Maybe next time pick your battles more carefully." Less than 20 minutes later, the real cops arrived, sirens screaming, lights flashing. Axel had been recalled to my side, sitting quietly beside me like a soldier at rest. The fake HOA enforcers stood awkwardly on the lawn, heads down, pride shredded to pieces. A uniformed officer approached, eyeing the broken door with concern. "Care to explain what happened here, sir?" I pulled out my badge and flashed it, my voice clipped with authority. "Detective James Donovan, City Police. These men illegally entered my home, impersonating law enforcement." The officer's eyes widened in surprise as he recognized me immediately. "Detective Carter." I nodded, glancing at the three pale-faced imposters. "The one and only." Karen sputtered, eyes bulging. "He's lying. He's no detective. He's a troublemaker." I slowly turned to her, my voice dangerously calm. "Karen, the only troublemaker here is you. Breaking and entering, intimidation, hiring fake officers. You're building quite the rap sheet." The officer glanced from me to Karen, realization dawning. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "are you telling me you orchestrated this?" Karen, eyes wild with panic, shook her head violently. "No, it was I was just trying to enforce the rules." But no one was listening anymore. They saw through her charade. The murmurs grew louder, whispers cutting like knives through the crowd gathering along the street. The officer sighed deeply, pulling out his notebook. "Ma'am, you're going to have to come with us." Karen froze, mouth agape. For the first time, she was powerless, exposed in front of everyone she'd once manipulated. As the officers took her statement, I watched from the porch, Axel at my feet. The next day, I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" The voice was muffled, nervous. "Mr. Carter, listen closely. I work with Karen. I know things you need to hear." I straightened. "Who is this?" "That doesn't matter," the voice hurriedly said. "She's not just harassing people. She's running a bigger operation. She's involved in something dangerous." I frowned, glancing around the room instinctively. "What exactly are we talking about here?" The voice paused. "She's not alone. It's bigger than the HOA. Karen is connected. Powerful people, city officials, lawyers. You need to be careful." The call ended abruptly. I stared at my phone, heart pounding. This wasn't just petty neighborhood drama anymore. Karen was in deeper than I ever imagined, and I just stepped into the line of fire. I spent the night poring over documents, piecing together patterns from old police records and public records. Karen's name popped up multiple times. Property sales, questionable foreclosures, forged paperwork, and then buried in a dusty file from 4 years ago, I found it. A lawsuit accusing Karen of fraud, harassment, and extortion. It had been quietly dismissed by the judge, the complainants paid off or intimidated into silence. My pulse quickened. Karen had done this before, many times, and each time she had gotten away with it. She wasn't just some busybody harassing the neighborhood. She was running a full-scale racket, carefully protected by powerful allies in local government. And now those allies had likely already heard about me. That night, my security cameras caught movement. At 3:04 a.m., a shadow moved near my fence, quickly ducking out of view. Then another. My adrenaline spiked. I grabbed Axel, checked my gun, and stepped outside, flashlight piercing the darkness. "Who's there?" I demanded sharply. No answer. Only silence. Axel growled low, his eyes fixed on the shadows. Suddenly, a harsh whisper cut through the dark. "You've been warned, Carter. Back off or you'll regret it." I turned my flashlight toward the voice, catching a brief glimpse of a hooded figure darting away. Footsteps retreated quickly, fading into the night. That wasn't Karen. It was someone else. Someone sent to scare me off. I called Reynolds immediately. "They're escalating," I told him bluntly. "It's not just Karen. She's backed by someone powerful." "We're looking into it," Reynolds said calmly. "Stay safe, Carter." But safety was no longer guaranteed. Karen was desperate, cornered, and clearly not working alone. This went beyond an HOA feud. I was dealing with a dangerous network that was ready to protect itself at all costs. The following morning, I woke to pounding at my door. This time it wasn't Karen or fake security officers. It was Detective Alvarez, a man I recognized from my years on the force. His expression was grim. "Carter, you need to see this." He handed me a manila envelope. Inside were surveillance photos of me, my house, even Axel. Each photo had timestamps and notes. Routine, suspicious, threat. "Where did these come from?" I asked, stunned. "Karen's house," Alvarez said bitterly. "You weren't her only target. There were others. Several neighbors are under surveillance. You're just her latest obsession." I looked up sharply. "How'd she get these?" "Connections," he replied. "Police cameras, security footage. Someone on the inside is helping her." My fists clenched. Karen wasn't just harassing neighbors. She was running a full-blown espionage operation against people she didn't like, and she had powerful help. The air around me felt heavy. Quiet retirement? That was over. Now I had one mission: to uncover exactly who Karen's allies were and bring them all down, no matter the cost. Reynolds placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We'll handle this, but be careful. Karen won't stop now. She knows you're onto her." I nodded slowly. "Good. Let her come." Axel nudged my leg, sensing my tension. I knelt, scratching behind his ears, my voice quiet but firm. "This isn't over, boy. Not by a long shot." Because now, it wasn't just about my home or some silly HOA fines. This had become a fight for justice, a fight to stop Karen's reign of intimidation, lies, and corruption once and for all. And she had no idea just how ready I was for this battle. She wanted war? She got it. I frowned, glancing around instinctively, my detective instincts suddenly roaring back to life. "What kind of danger are we talking about?" The voice hesitated, the silence stretching just enough to make my heart rate quicken. "Let's just say she's not alone. She's been working closely with someone high up in city administration. They're seizing properties, forcing homeowners out with bogus fines, fake foreclosures. Some people have lost their life savings, others much more." "Why haven't you reported this before?" I demanded, my voice sharper than intended. "They have people everywhere," the voice whispered urgently. "Police, city inspectors, lawyers, you name it. Anyone who challenges them gets buried in lawsuits or run out of town. I've seen it." "Do you have proof?" Another pause, longer this time. "Yes, but if they find out I'm talking to you, I'm done. Meet me tonight at midnight behind the old community center. Come alone." The line clicked dead. I stood there in silence, staring at my phone, processing the gravity of the situation. This had suddenly gone far beyond petty HOA drama. Karen was running something deeper, darker, something backed by people who had power, real power. It explained why she'd been so bold, why she'd tried so hard to silence me. Axel nudged my hand, sensing my tension. I gently patted his massive head. "Looks like retirement is going to have to wait, buddy." Midnight came fast. I arrived early, parking 2 blocks away and walking carefully through the shadows. Years on the force had taught me caution, and I wasn't taking any chances. Axel walked silently at my side, ears alert, ready for anything. The abandoned community center was dark, a looming silhouette that cast eerie shadows under the faint streetlights. I stepped carefully around broken pavement and overgrown weeds until I reached the rear lot. The air was thick with tension. My gut warned me something was off. "You made it!" I turned quickly, recognizing the voice. It was a young woman, Jessica, the HOA secretary, who always seemed quiet, reserved. Now she stood there, visibly shaken, clutching a thick file tightly against her chest. "You said you have evidence," I prompted softly, scanning the darkness around us. Jessica nodded, eyes wide with fear. "Yes, but it's not safe here. Karen knows too many people. If she finds out—" Her voice caught, cutting off abruptly as headlights swung around the corner, flooding the alleyway with harsh, blinding light. Instinctively, I pushed Jessica behind me, my hand moving toward my concealed firearm. A black SUV screeched to a halt mere feet away, doors flying open as 2 men jumped out. They moved quickly, aggressively, faces shadowed, but I recognized their tactical vests instantly, identical to the fake officers Karen had hired before. "Hand over the file, Jessica," one of them barked, his voice low and threatening. "Don't move!" I ordered sharply, drawing my weapon in a smooth, practiced motion. "I'm armed. Take another step and it'll be your last." They hesitated, clearly not expecting resistance, but the driver, a heavy-set man I recognized as one of Karen's security officers, scoffed. "You don't want this fight, detective. Just hand over the file." "That's not happening," I shot back, voice icy. "I suggest you boys turn around right now." "You think you're protected because you're a cop?" He laughed bitterly, stepping closer. "You don't know who you're dealing with. This goes way beyond your little neighborhood drama." "Enlighten me," I snapped, never breaking eye contact. "You don't want to know how deep this goes," he warned, his voice low, dangerous. "Your choice, hand it over or suffer the consequences." Jessica clutched the file tighter, trembling. "Please," she whispered, "they'll kill me if they get this." I stared back at the men, heart pounding in my ears. "You threaten us again, you'll leave in cuffs or worse." They exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering briefly. Then, as if silently agreeing this wasn't worth the risk, they backed toward the SUV. "You'll regret this," the driver growled. "No," I said, my voice steely. "Karen's already made that mistake." They retreated quickly, vanishing into the SUV. Tires squealed as it raced away, leaving us standing there, breathing heavily in the silence. Jessica stared at me, wide-eyed, voice trembling. "They're not going to stop. They've got powerful friends." I took the file from her shaking hands, opening it cautiously. Inside were bank transfers, forged property deeds, lists of homeowners forced into foreclosure, and one damning signature repeated over and over, a senior city official named Richard Donovan. My jaw tightened. "This goes deeper than Karen." Jessica nodded. "She's the face, but he's the one pulling the strings." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just some petty HOA power trip. Karen was fronting a criminal operation, aided by someone powerful enough to silence anyone who stood against them. "Jessica," I said firmly, "you're safe now, but this isn't over." "I know," she whispered, eyes filling with fear. "That's what scares me." I tucked the file under my arm, glancing around cautiously. The night had changed everything. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was a dangerous criminal, part of something far larger and far darker than I'd imagined. A network of corruption had rooted itself deep into our peaceful community, and I just placed myself squarely in their sights. But they made one critical mistake. They threatened my home. They threatened innocent people, and they picked the wrong man to intimidate. Because now I wasn't just a homeowner trying to enjoy retirement. Now I was a cop on a mission, and they had no idea what was coming next. The next morning, the neighborhood felt different. Darker, tense, like a storm gathering on the horizon. I spent the night awake, digging through public records, tapping contacts I'd made as a detective, pulling every favor I had left. The name Jessica gave me, Richard Donovan, led down a rabbit hole of real estate scams, forged documents, and suspicious transactions. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was the polished mask for a criminal empire built on corruption. 2 days later, I stood outside the city courthouse, my pulse steady. Inside was the hearing that would determine Karen's fate in our community. But this wasn't just about her. The puppet master behind her, Richard Donovan, had shown his hand, and it was my move. As I walked into the courtroom, heads turned. Neighbors, the media, city officials, all eyes locked on me, the rogue homeowner taking on an entire network of corruption. Karen was seated at the front, composed but pale, her lawyer whispering rapidly into her ear. Across the aisle sat Donovan, impeccably dressed, radiating smug confidence. He glanced over, our eyes meeting briefly. In that instant, we silently sized each other up, adversaries facing off before battle. The judge called for silence, and the proceedings began. Karen took the stand first, voice trembling slightly as she played the victim. "I only ever wanted to keep our community safe," she said, voice cracking for effect. "This entire thing is a misunderstanding." Her lawyer stepped forward, trying to cast me as a rogue detective with a vendetta. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. "Your Honor," I began, "there's no misunderstanding here. What we're dealing with is organized intimidation, corruption, and blatant abuse of power." I handed the judge the file. Evidence meticulously compiled over the past days. Photos of smashed mailboxes, vandalized property, security footage of fake officers forcing entry, audio of threats from Karen's associates, even Donovan's veiled warning over the phone. The courtroom buzzed with shock. Donovan shifted uneasily in his seat, sweat beating at his temple for the first time. Karen went ghost white, her hands trembling visibly. "I purchased my home years before this HOA existed," I said clearly. "Yet these individuals tried to terrorize and intimidate me into submission, and when that failed, they hired thugs to kick down my door. Your Honor, this is not neighborhood governance. It's organized crime." I paused for effect, letting the words hang heavy in the air. Karen shot to her feet, voice shrill, desperate. "He's lying, he's—" But the judge silenced her with a sharp look. "You had your chance, Miss Karen. Sit down." As the evidence piled up, Karen's facade cracked further. She went from angry to desperate, flailing to save herself, even willing to throw Donovan under the bus. "He told me I'd be protected," she shouted, pointing at Donovan. "He arranged everything. The fake officers, the threats. It was his idea." Gasps erupted through the courtroom. Donovan's calm demeanor evaporated instantly. "That's ridiculous," he snapped, but his voice betrayed him. "No," Karen said, her eyes wild now, desperate. "This was his idea. He funded everything." The judge raised an eyebrow, turning to Donovan. "Mr. Donovan, care to comment?" Donovan sat rigid, his knuckles white as he clenched the table. "I invoke my right to remain silent," he muttered. That was all the judge needed. The gavel struck the wooden bench decisively. "This case is beyond my jurisdiction. I'm forwarding all evidence to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation." Gasps filled the room. Karen slumped, defeated, knowing her days of power were over. Donovan stared straight ahead, finally realizing he couldn't buy or threaten his way out of this. The verdict came swiftly. Karen was immediately removed as HOA president, banned from holding any position of power again. Donovan faced a grand jury for corruption, conspiracy, and abuse of power. Justice had arrived swiftly, and it hit hard. A month later, I sat once again on my porch, a fresh cup of coffee steaming gently in the morning sun. Axel sprawled lazily at my feet, ears twitching slightly as neighborhood kids rode past, laughing without fear. The neighborhood had returned to peace, real peace this time. Neighbors waved at me with genuine smiles. A few even thanked me openly for what I'd done. But the scars lingered. Karen had left behind a legacy of mistrust and anxiety that wouldn't fade overnight. And Donovan's network of corruption had shaken the community's belief in its own safety. Yet for me, it was a victory. A victory not just against corrupt officials or an HOA tyrant, but against the very idea that power and privilege granted immunity from justice. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I settled into my porch chair, Axel resting by my feet. The neighborhood was quiet again, the gentle hum of life returning. I took a slow sip of coffee, watching as the last rays of sunlight faded, leaving a warm twilight. For now, peace had returned. But deep down, I knew the price of peace meant vigilance. Because if life had taught me anything as a detective, it's that evil never truly disappears. It just waits. I scratched Axel's head, and he sighed contentedly, stretching out at my feet. "Well, buddy," I whispered softly, "looks like retirement is going to have to wait." The night fell silent again, but this time I was ready for anything. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this crazy HOA showdown, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.